Scott, I recall when the Columbine High School shooting occurred, I think in 1999 or 1996, something like that. To me, it was one of the most shocking things that had ever happened. But Americans are almost becoming desensitized to these mass shooting events. How are you today, Scott?
I'm doing very well, Jason. It's good to be with you.
Good to be with you, and I think everyone's pleased to see you and interested to hear your viewpoint as a firearms expert, a former U.S. Army officer, an expert in psychological operations. What can you tell us, Scott, about these two incredibly disturbing, violent events that occurred in less than 24 hours? What have you learned since they occurred?
Well, there's a lot of course, irregularities and strangeness and psychological implications. This obviously is something that I think is designed to distract Americans from some of the larger political revelations that have been coming out, whether it's regarding the Mueller probe or the disintegration of the entire Russiagate hoax and the more important examination and Inspector General and Department of Justice prosecution of the people associated with this. There's also tangential political issues that were going on that were very politically disruptive, whether it was the Cummings, Baltimore revelations of Trump. There was just a lot that seemed to be going on that was preparing for Trump to do a massive broadside, the Republicans to do a broadside. They had won everything with the annihilation of the Mueller argument from Jordan, Gates, all the Devin Nunes, all of the usual suspects that have been up there in Congress. And it seemed like Trump and his administration and people were really preparing for a full exposure and counterattack on these people. And then this happened. And we've been saying this for quite a while, that they were going to be launching false flag attacks, that they were going to be initiating these sorts of distraction operations and shootings. And then it happens. Then they have this event at Walmart where an individual apparently walks in and he's got headgear on, he's got eye protection on, which means, he's not really in there for a suicidal combat operation. He's in there just for fun and exercise and training. Perhaps he's been recruited by police to go in there. This is going to be a training operation. Perhaps he's a medicated, hypnotized individual. I don't know, but the pictures are irregular. He's the first one of the guy coming into the store wearing cargo pants with deep pockets on the left and right legs are not apparent. The pants are not the same as the individual who's outside being arrested and questioned.
Are we sure? Can you tell from this photo?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can pretty much tell the person on the right that's coming in with the gun raised and the ear protection on. You can see on his upper left and right thigh 45-degree angle zippers, or they look to be pockets. And the other picture on the left with the guy standing with his hands behind his back and a sort of a nonchalant, just kicking back, chewing the fat with this cop. He seems to have, there's a khaki pant that I have myself. The khaki pants that are just sort of standard dress 5.0, what do they call the 511s?
Dockers or whatever.
Well, 511 has a combat pant that is pockets inside. They're usually worn by plainclothes police guys. That's what these look like. Yeah, I've got a couple pair of them, and that's why I saw them. I said those aren't the cargo pants. Those look like the 511 kind of dress pants, and it looked odd to me. And then, of course, you have a guy going in with one weapon, and he's allegedly the shooter, and he's allegedly also killed 20 and wounded 30 or something to that event. You can't do that with one 30-round clip. And if you're not into combat training, it's really hard to hit people when they're running. It's really hard to continue to shoot and hit people when you're a civilian and you haven't been trained. It's not a video game, and the only way that people could get through an operation like that is if it's not real. if it's not a real killing scenario. So I'm not sure if there were other shooters. That's the other thing I know we're going to discuss. There were some big questions that popped out, that we were examining on Monday, such as number one, the Walmart questions, or how many cameras are in Walmart? And the question is, why, if this shooting lasted for 20 minutes, is there not at least 10 consecutive hours of shooting video from 30 cameras? There's more than 30 in Walmart, but let's guess 30 caught it real good. Where is the video? Two, how did the shooting continue for 20 minutes? How long does it take for people to leave Walmart? What would be the reaction of people hearing gunshots in Walmart? The guess is that all opportunities to hit people would be totally over in a minute and 30 seconds. Yet this continues for a 20-minute shooting event. 20 minutes is it's an eternity, in fact. So I don't perceive that. When people get into a panic situation, Jason, it's like the Spanish running with the bulls. People just flood and run, and they stampede. That didn't happen, allegedly. So that tells me this is an operation. People were told to stay where they were.
Well, let me pause you a second, Scott, because you're raising good points that obviously every single incident needs to be investigated. You know, the evidence of the specific incident needs to be taken into account, but we also now have enough of a body of evidence. There's so many of these shooting events that have occurred that we can start to compare them to one another and pull out some of the patterns. Now, you're talking about multiple shooters. There's another aspect to this, which is, as David Hawkins would say, the injection of fake news plays. Now, this is we've got so much confusion going on here. We've got two different pictures of this El Paso shooter that look like substantially different people. And, they're being published to this day by allegedly reputable sources. What do we make of that?
Well, there are reports of multiple shooters. There's a Hispanic woman that made a video saying 3 people wearing similar outfits were inside shooting. Again, Walmart. If you're in a Walmart, it's a massive building with cameras all over the place. It's a huge maze. The absence of turning over all these cameras and such is probably because there may have been more shooters. It may have been an operation. We don't know yet. They've clamped down on all of the video and all of the coroner and medical information. We don't know exactly if anybody really was killed, if they were taken via ambulance. I don't think any helicopters were flown in, which is very odd. Because if you're hit with a 7.62 AK-47, you're going to have a hole in you the size of a baseball. That is a powerful weapon. And,
what was the gun that he used?
An AK-47. An AK-47, which is it's the standard 7.62 Kalashnikov. And there are some oddities about that gun too, though. When I saw the shooter picture, it had a plastic-looking beige magazine. Now, I've never, ever seen a Kalashnikov with a beige magazine. I've seen, ARs and all sorts of other ones, but AKs always have black metal magazines. They don't have plastic magazines unless it's a BB gun or a pellet gun or a cap gun or something else. So this guy's weapon was odd. It did not match the traditional AK-47 kit, which is always a metal magazine. M1s and AR-15s and even M16. Well, M16s, but AR-15s. The standard military rifle. Those are all plastic magazines. And they're colored, desert camouflage, tan, things like that. But the AK-47s are not. I've never seen an AK with a tan magazine. So
Scott, let me just ask you real quick. So, see, the other thing that's happening, and this is would be the natural function of two of these shootings happening in such close proximity. But it's very difficult to sort out many of the facts and details with regard to which element of evidence corresponds to the El Paso shooting and which corresponds to the Dayton, Ohio shooting. So this is a picture that I had seen, and as you're mentioning this high-capacity magazine, this certainly looks like a plastic thing. I don't know
yeah,
anything.
that's a drum magazine. That's a drum magazine. I've had one of those before myself. Those carry, that'll carry right there probably 100 rounds, 50 rounds per drum. I had several of those in my arsenal, and they're very, very effective. But that was not what was used in the El Paso shooting.
Right.
The El Paso shooting that came in with Walmart, it was a single AK-47 with a single beige-colored magazine inserted, and that only carries 30 rounds. And he didn't have any kit. He didn't have any belt. He didn't have pockets bulging with two or more magazines. And there was no, there's no reload and things like that. So,
well, we can even see him here in what is perhaps the clearest shot of him actually wielding the weapon. And I don't see any kind of high capacity. I mean, again, I don't really know what I'm looking at, but oh, I see it right there. This is the magazine you're talking about.
Yeah, that's the magazine.
But couldn't he paint it? Couldn't he just paint it?
But why? But
well,
I mean, why?
Know.
See, that's what's the oddest thing about that picture. When I saw that, and it honestly, that doesn't even look like a real AK-47. There's something odd about that weapon.
What looks not real about it?
Well, the butt is not the same color as the wooden grip that his left hand is holding. The rifle butt that goes up into your shoulder, that's a different color than the wood at the end of the gun. The beige magazine, of course, is a different color. I wouldn't be surprised if that was some sort of a BB or pellet or other kind of weapon. It doesn't look like a real weapon. It may be, and I'm not trying to throw too much stuff up there, but I've never seen an AK with a beige colored magazine inserted like that. That was odd.
And
so
Scott,
it could have been a special.
Boss Mayor 007 is watching us on Periscope right now, says that AK-47s have been illegal since 1989. Why are AK-47s illegal?
Well, I had an AK-47 in Virginia. They're not illegal in the United States. Fully automatic weapons have to require a special license, but I had an AK-47, and you can get them at Virginia gun shows. You can get them at gun shows all over the country. They're designed in former Soviet countries like Romania or Hungary or places like that. And I had an AK that was from Arsenal Arms, and I think it was made out of Utah. So
isn't that a Bulgarian company, Arsenal?
It may be. I'm not entirely sure the origin, but there's different variations. Some are like single stamped pieces of metal, and other ones are prefabricated. But I don't believe they are. I don't believe they're outlawed in the United States, because I had one. It wasn't a fully automatic one, of course, but I had one in Virginia, and it was perfectly legal. So I don't think they're prohibited.
And of course, we've also recently had this Gilroy Garlic Festival where there was a shooting.
That's right.
That the guy used an AK-47. It's just one shooting after the next, and they immediately go to using them against Donald Trump. There's been this monumentous level of attention put onto white supremacy movements. I mean, of course, yes. I personally denounce white supremacy. We're talking about supporters of KKK, Nazism, these sort of things. I'm not into any of that. I don't perceive that Donald Trump is either, but I think that the media is constantly spinning whatever he says. And, forgive me, Scott, before we get too deep into the show, I do want to let everyone know, if you haven't seen Scott before, he is a former Army Psychological Operations Specialist, and he's the author of Shell Game. Scott has revealed tremendous information about terror financing and the links between the Union Bank of Switzerland, the CIA, NSA, the Department of Justice, all of our clandestine services, and naming specific names like Dov Zakheim and people who are involved in Covington and Burling, Eric Holder, etc. This report's been delivered to Congress, and in what may be the ultimate frustration, nothing has been done. Correction, something has been done. Scott got thrown in jail, but nothing has been done relative to the terror financing and the information that he's brought forward.
Yeah, it's a tragedy that I think is going to be coming to full fruition in the near future. But this is all, I think, a sign of the deep state desperation. These multiple shooting allegations from Gilroy in Texas, in Ohio, it's very odd. It seems like they're creating these events in order to demonize, of course, guns to a whole new level. Now you've got protesters surrounding Mitch McConnell's home, calling for his death threats. This seems to be a desperate attempt to usher in things like a domestic terrorist bill, which ironically was just introduced. And there's one other thing, Jason, you're probably familiar with. There was a report that Connor Bett's obituary in Suffield, Connecticut, Hartford Funeral Homes. There was a obituary of a young man who is claimed to have been related to the shooting incident. I'm not sure if you've seen that, but I can send you that. Let me
interject, because I have seen that obituary, and what's come out most recently is that it does seem to be a different individual with a very similar name, as well as a sister with an almost identical name. So it's a strange set of circumstances, but there is good reason to believe that that's a different Connor Betts. I believe I do have, I was talking with John Cullen about this, and he's done quite a bit of research into the matter. I want to show you the video here. I've got it. Sorry, I'm just looking for it while we speak. But what happened was, I think, that got people really sort of, focusing on that is that they scrubbed the obituary, and what the funeral home is saying is that that was done because the page was being overwhelmed with hateful messages, and we certainly have no reason to believe that that is not a true statement. This individual certainly looks different. If you go to the Hartford Courant now, this legacy.com obituary has been removed. As I understand it, this Connor Betts was Connor D. Betts, different name, different age. Has a sister named Megan as well. I presume people named Connor and Megan are frequently Irish, and those are pretty common names in Irish families. So we should presume this to be true until it's proven otherwise. But the funeral home and legacy.com are telling us that this obituary was pulled because there were hateful messages being inserted into the guest book. And I mean, this is a terrible tragedy. Any family that loses a child certainly does not deserve, no family deserves to be harassed. But yeah, you can see it now. Says, sorry, the page is not available. I reloaded the page while I was making that screen capture video. But I'm glad we have that so we can look at it. And I'm also glad that there was a report in Newsweek yesterday that went into some detail about how this Connor Betts was electrocuted in a work accident and does not seem to be related at all to any of the shootings.
Well, the other thing that's come out is this S-894 Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act. I don't know if you've read that, but this is a very disturbing bill that has just been put forth. Again, this seems to be ironically similar to the Patriot Act that was put forth after 9/11 within a month. This bill, the S-894 Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act, is put forth by Dick Durbin in the Judiciary Committee in the Senate, and it's sponsored by a bunch of Democrats, and it's essentially geared against, quote, white supremacism. That's all it mentions, and
it's pretty vague.
It seems to be. Well, it seems to be setting up the grounds for a race war. If you're going to go after everybody who's white and call them a white supremacist and justify red flag laws to knock on people's doors to determine if they're a threat or not just because they're white, or somebody calls in an anonymous complaint saying, hey, I think this person's a white supremacist, suddenly you're now empowering the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, the Federal Bureau of Investigation to, quote, analyze and monitor domestic terrorist activity and require the federal government to take steps to prevent domestic terrorism. That's right out of the language, and I can read more of it. This is a bill to authorize domestic terrorism offices within the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, to analyze and monitor domestic terrorist activity and require the federal government to take steps to prevent it. And then it goes on and it labels all of these events that they attribute to, quote, far right-wing patriot movement, white supremacists. And it goes on, a report, 2017 Joint Intelligence Bulletin from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Department of Homeland Security found that white supremacist extremism poses a persistent threat of lethal violence, and that white supremacists were responsible for 49 homicides and 26 attacks from 2000 to 2016. And they go on to list all of these events, August 2012, 2014, 2015, 2016. They even go in and list Charlottesville, Virginia, a white supremacist killed 1 and injured 19 after driving his car through a crowd of individuals protesting a neo-Nazi rally, and of which, former Jeff Sessions said it does not meet the definition of domestic terrorism. Well, the Charlottesville, Virginia attack, I think, has been pretty much debunked. I think Fetzer did a very good job, and others have too, on analyzing the photography and the different images, some with banners and flags and some without, so that it looked like there were multiple stage car incidents. The whole thing, just when you put the whole puzzle together, looked like it was a staged event. So Charlottesville is very, very suspect. The individual driving the car was not the individual who was charged. The individual driving the car was looking very physically different and was tied to some military post in Ohio, it was labeled. So the Charlottesville event looks to be false, but it's inserted into the creation of this domestic terrorist bill. And this, to me, is very alarming because it sets the tone that is going to try and create this office in the law enforcement and intelligence agencies that are geared towards specifically white terrorist or white domestic terrorist suspicions.
Scott, I get very concerned about these things because when they talk about preventative, preemptive, these bills always seem to be anti-constitutional, and they come up with this sort of supra-constitutional term like a white supremacist. I don't know that there's a legal definition for a white supremacist, and surely any sensible person, in my view, would renounce and denounce white supremacy. I've noticed over the past several months, while they've been seeding this idea, seeding this language, some of the people that they have called white supremacists, Candace Owens, she's lovely, but she's not even white. How could she be a white supremacist? Laura Loomer, I think everybody knows that Laura is a Jewish activist, very pro-Israel, very pro-Judaism. I think white supremacists are generally equated with Nazis, and I don't know that that's the correct term for what Laura is. I think she is an activist, and she's certainly a conservative journalist, but not a white supremacist. I mean, white supremacists want to destroy other races that are non-white. Isn't that correct?
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, I don't even know what these terms now are meaning. When I hear that and see that, I see videos and I've got see people with their shirts off with swastikas or Hitlerian sort of memorabilia that is tattooed on them, and they're usually missing a few teeth and growing a lot of beard and drinking beer at some southern
Well, I think there's some that wear suits and get into Congress. What about David Duke? He's a white supremacist. He was a KKK member.
Yeah, Yeah, well, and there's a lot of them. It's kind of alien to us in our age, Jason, because we're not part of that. We don't go out and practice that. We're not into that. And to see that, it's very suspect. I've never personally, in my days in the military or elsewhere, I've never run in and talked and found anybody who has a militant anti racial animus or hatred or some sort of delusion. I just don't know if the whole thing is a propaganda to again divide people and create these tension points to justify police state tactics. This
Right.
is this is a perfect lever to pull and usher in a massive increase in police state power. And no one likes the police state more than the police. They're the ones who wear the guns. They're the ones who have the body armor. They're the ones who have the badges around their neck. It's their own personal cult. It's their own personal fraternity. And that's exactly what the founding fathers were against and feared. That's why they gave everybody the right to keep and bear arms. And that's another problem. I want to go back to the very top of this. The beginning of this analysis, we looked at an article that was coming out about all the things that Trump was doing in response to this. And Jim Fetzer and I were talking about this, and I was disturbed, and so was Jim, that Trump may be knee-jerk pushed into an emotional response with regards to this whole thing, and maybe making decisions and suggesting policies that are not going to be supported by Americans who like their Second Amendment rights, that do not go out and hurt anyone, rob anyone, kill anyone. They don't raise their arms in some sort of salute to a white supremacist agenda or any agenda other than their constitutional rights and things like that. Like the group that was in the Malheur refuge, that Larry Klayman was helpful in representing Bundy, and Lavoy Finicum had been up there and he was killed, of course. Those weren't white supremacists. Those were constitutional, people. But some of the things that has come out that Trump's done that he really needs to be cautious about, I'm going to read it. This was out on August 5th by Tyler Durden on can't remember the
Zero Hedge. Zero Hedge.
Zero Hedge. Thank you. Trump calls for red flag laws to stop dangerous individuals from buying guns. Update. Trump said that he had instructed the Department of Justice to propose legislation to ensure those who commit hate crimes and could face death, and those who commit hate crimes could face the death penalty, while also stating red flag laws to ensure that those deemed a risk to public safety don't have access to firearms. Well, that's a constitutional violation right there. You can't stop people from their Second Amendment rights unless they've violated the law, and you've determined that through due process, a jury of their peers, and their day in court. You can't have a bureaucrat or an agency or a president who's nothing more than a bureaucrat in an agency called the White House. You can't have someone taking away the constitutional rights of a person. The president also blamed video games for radicalizing shooters and condemned white supremacy. And these are the bullet points of what he said and done. Quote,
Scott,
Trump blames internet.
Thomas Geist is telling us you can buy Desert Tan mags for AKs.
Okay, I may stand corrected. I've never seen a Desert Tan mag for AKs, but maybe you can.
And someone tells us shots fired in Irvington, New Jersey. Large police presence.
Yeah, it's easy. I mean, the sky is falling. They're throwing up all of these, things and let me just say, that's not to say that America is not experiencing a serious disintegration in its moral family character, on its cohesiveness. It's not to say a population of young people that have been over-medicated or educated with all sorts of perverse, garbage in schools, whether it's rabid environmentalism and worshiping of the environment to the point of religious hysteria, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the Green Deal sort of foments. It's not to say that young men are feeling isolated and metrosexualized or transgenderized. It's not to say that America is not suffering from serious social disintegration, because it is. And Peter Lavelle talked about that on the Duran, and he's very good, and I enjoyed his presentation. where he, articulates this. There's some very serious problems that are undermining. If you believe the shooting really happened and it was real and it was a nut job and a guy went in and did this, fine. Let's say for the sake of argument, it happened. Then you move on and say, well, why did this happen? Why did this, guy do this? And there's all sorts of social science, factors and the breakup of the family, the broken homes, divorce, medication, all of this stuff leads to the contributing factors that I think excite this mania, this delusion. I mean, antidepressants and all the other drugs that they're flooding society with. I think that has a large explanation for this. I think that they are also recruiting people to be used in these sort of operations.
Well, Scott, many people have been telling us in the comments that one of these shooters, his father was a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and we've heard a lot about this. Also, we've got Global Dom in the comments here. It's a strange name, but reminding us of Palantir. Palantir, as I understand it, is an AI-driven big data framework for basically predicting crime, monitoring everybody through social media, through surveillance cameras. It goes beyond social media and utilizes data points that are available only to law enforcement. So you think about how much information you have on somebody by looking at their Facebook, their Instagram, their where they are, what they're doing, who their friends are. You couple that now with municipal closed circuit surveillance cameras and monitoring cell phone activity in a way that normal civilians cannot. Palantir is an incredibly powerful system that I think we don't even necessarily fully understand. I recall Robin Gritz telling me she had received some training in it while at the FBI, but of course that was many years ago, and people know that software capabilities advance extremely rapidly. It also reminds me, Scott, of a comment that Kevin Shipp had made a long time ago, which is that basically Amazon and things like Palantir and all this big tech is working on creating some all-powerful artificial intelligence that uses all this big data to actually predict human behavior. And we've all spoken many times, real quick, I'll finish this up. We've all spoken many times about how if you look up new shoes on Google, you'll start receiving ads for new shoes. And many people have even noticed recently that even if you just have a cell phone sitting next to you and you talk about shoes, likely you will see ads later today or even right now advertising shoes to you, because when you download whatever, Instagram, Facebook, Amazon, you're saying, okay, I agree to the terms, and those include we're going to listen to whatever you say. What about this idea of predictive stuff? I've had that experience where I feel like, boy, I didn't even say that. I'm just thinking about it, and here's an ad for it. Are we getting there?
Well, I think it's even more insidious than that. We are getting there to address your advertising, market research, synthesizing of your mind, your leisure activities, your professional activities, synthesizing all of that into a singular personality profile that can then be sold to market the various products and services that profile is most inclined to desire or actively use. That's already there. That's been there for a while. Of course, it's been quickened, but advertising has always utilized that. Now it's being quickened by technology and computers and multiple information streams that can be brought in, almost like IVs into your person. So that's there, and that's where you've got some illegal selling of data and people are being violated. But the more insidious danger, and I've seen this, and I can't talk too expressively about it. I can't talk about where and why and all that, but I have seen algorithmic computer programming and things like this that seek to manage and create media events where and it's gotten a lot more sophisticated since the years that I've seen it, but you have technology out there that essentially can create an event and cloak and pad that event with corroborating false events. So you create a false event, then you create corroborating false events, corroborating false testimony, and then you have corroborating news agencies, news programs commenting and corroborating on the multiple layers. It's a multi-dimensional, multi-layered psychological operation tool, and it was a computer algorithmic sort of tool, and it may have been intended for good intentions and trying to take away a lot of the human processing that's required for information war, and they've artificially intelligencized it, if you will, and it can now take a life on its own. So when you see things like this shooting event, so you can instantly generate numerous media posts and perspectives and comments and things like that that really don't exist. They're just there to pad the story, to seed and to fill up space, and that's where the disturbing thing is, because now you've got a story that's created and it's launched, and now it's feasted upon by the media channels like piranhas, right? The ABC, NBC, MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, all of them rush in and take little bites, little parts, and they live off the emotional adrenaline that exists on these things. That's what's also disturbing, and that's why we as Americans need to step back from a lot of these things. And it's always a safer and healthier default position if you one, turn off the channel, or two, just turn it off in your mind and recognize and accept that this is a false flag event designed to create a psychological condition, pressure, behavioral alteration in you. It's meant to guilt trip you. It's meant to make you despise yourself, despise guns, despise independence or a rugged sense of individuality. It's meant to provoke this kumbaya, socialistic, let's all give each other a hug. It's meant to provoke these mantras that say, we don't need any more prayers, we need gun control. That's right. The new mantra that's been floating around.
Yeah.
And those are very carefully crafted slogans. We don't need prayers, we need gun control. Yeah. So they're trying to make synonymous the prayer that people are offering for healing and comfort and soothing. They're making that synonymous with a legislative policy action that Beto O'Rourke and these other lunatic leftists are viciously and desperately and fanatically trying to introduce, that say everybody's, save that shit for the battlefield and get it out of our communities. Well,
now, Scott, let me pause you because I want to touch on what you just brought up. This is a particularly fascinating point that you've raised. I don't know how much time you've had to look into some of the interviews I've done with David Hawkins, but what you've just described sounds exactly like the Kinetic North America Social Engineering Protection Appliance. According to the patent, basically the abstract describes this as methods and systems for detecting social engineering attacks, compromise, extracting one or more non-semantic data items from an incoming email, determining whether the one or more non-semantic data items match information stored in data previously. This is basically for identifying communications between people like you and I, and utilizing social engineering tactics to inject media plays, etc. This, David Hawkins closely equates to Serco combined resilience exercises, where they specifically say that they have actors and they are able to create simulations, workshop exercises designed to assist with plan development, full-scale rehearsals of operations or coordination centers, integration of live exercise play. They also talk about integrating social media, feedback, media support that involves utilizing real journalists, etc. So there have been many points of data brought to our attention that tell us that this type of activity is actually happening. And here you are talking about it, that you've seen it. When you say you've seen it, what is it? And what exactly have you seen?
Well, that's a question that I have to tread gingerly, of course, because
Top secret
um,
material.
uh, yeah, it can be, it could be anything that's, anything like that. You've got to be ginger about. Let's just say it's uh, it's a little skiffy, if you will. It's a little skiffy, and it exists in skiffs and
Skiffy
things
meaning
like
what? You
that.
got to
And
be in a
there's a
secure location to talk. All right, so let's move off of that if you're uncomfortable talking about it, because the other thing I wanted to bring
yeah,
up
yeah,
is that back to this bill, this anti-domestic terrorism bill, one of the main things that they're referencing is this Linwood Mosque in Christchurch, New Zealand shooting where that guy was allegedly
yeah,
a white supremacist. Now, you and I
yes,
analyzed that quite extensively, and I
yes.
do want to let our viewers know, if they have not seen that analysis, I hope that people will go to patreon.com/shellgame. You can become a
Yeah.
sponsor of Scott on that Patreon page, and you can see the video that Scott and I did back in March analyzing frame by frame this really, let's call it interesting video that it has now become a crime to even possess in New Zealand. People
Yes.
can also see that video by becoming a sponsor on subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. Now, Scott, I don't know if you're aware of this, but just after that New Zealand shooting, there was a malicious social engineer who made a video trying to equate a legal analysis that Larry Klayman, Laura Loomer, and myself were exploring with regard to allegations against Ilhan Omar. This malicious, lying social engineer attempted to convince his rather large audience that Laura discovering evidence that Ilhan Omar may have violated U.S. law, including marriage fraud, alleged
Yeah.
tax fraud, alleged campaign finance violations. Laura's investigating facts and evidence. This malicious, lying social engineer wanted to make people believe that us investigating the possibility of crimes by a congressional representative somehow played a role in stoking this violence against Muslims in New Zealand.
Well, that's a lie and a cover up, of course, because the New Zealand shooting event did not occur in the way that the video and the explanation depicted it. So the whole thing is fruit of the poisonous tree. When one part is a lie, the entire thing is a lie. And that video that we've done, and Jim Fetzer and myself had done an exhaustive analysis, frame by frame by frame. You and I did an exhaustive analysis, frame by frame by frame. And having handled weapons and understanding the impact that bullets have on the human body, on walls, and the sound concussions. There are so many dynamics. There are so many variables in firing high caliber weapons in closed, confined spaces at small distances at human bodies, and the human body's reaction in stress and adrenaline. There are so many variables in that. When I saw the video, it was not a real video of real people being shot by real bullets reacting in the way that real human beings react. It was all an act. And without a doubt, after seeing that and going through the whole thing, it was a psyop. It was a very poorly constructed psyop. And then all the evidence starts coming out, and they started scrubbing it from the internet. The videos of people rehearsing inside the mosque on their cell phones with fake blood on their clothes. Then, of course, the people allegedly being shot at close range, no bullet holes, no blood spatter, no breaks of bones, no moaning and groaning and running and crawling and screaming, and no blood gushing out, which always
Hands and
happens.
feet
No holes in
twitching
the
and
wall.
moving from people who were allegedly dead and piled up. You know what I want to point out,
Nothing.
Scott? Because what we're experiencing right now, you say that, people, we could say people are naive or whatever it might be. When I was in NYU film school and they used to, make us take film history classes and things like this, they always spoke about how when the French Lumiere brothers invented the cinematograph, the first motion picture projector, camera. They basically had a movie theater, and they showed this very simple movie of a train entering a station, and allegedly the people in the theater ran out of the theater for fear of their lives that a train was going to crash through the wall of the theater. And as a modern viewer who's consumed hundreds of thousands of hours of motion picture entertainment, everyone basically watching today has grown up with television and motion pictures as a part of their lives. It's difficult for us to perceive now as modern audience members how someone might have reacted, but if you've never seen motion picture technology before, you've never seen a screen or a television or something, even photography was relatively new, you don't have any concept of what it is that's going on, and literally your instincts, your reptilian brain will cause that reaction to run out of there for fear. It's only because each of us have been so trained that this is an effigy on screen. You may go to a film and see a young child with the parents start screaming and crying about something that happens on screen, and always the parents will say, hey, don't worry, it's just a movie. So at some point in each of our lives, we've gained this intellectual understanding of what motion pictures are, and our brains are able to discern quite easily the difference between a motion picture and reality. So what you're talking about with these psychological operations and technologies that are used to enable them, perhaps if people aren't even aware of those technologies and haven't observed them and aren't able to differentiate between an actual event and a technology-generated event, that could be where we are right now with these type of psychological operations.
Yeah, I think it's traumatizing to the people to see these things because they're operating out of an old America mindset, and these are like flashbangs. They're throwing these flashbang grenades into people's homes, and it's disrupting, and it's traumatizing, and it's causing fear. It's causing nervousness. And people with kids or seniors or the vulnerable people in society are being whipped up in a fear frenzy, so that the solution, the savior of their fear, the deliverance is going to be through going back into Egypt slavery, giving up their guns, signing this bill, signing this petition that says, all guns are going to be banned, period, and we're going to live in paradise. That's the ultimate aim of these operatives, is to try and facilitate that. And anyone who stands against it is a white supremacist domestic terrorist. You can see that sort of positioning itself. You can see these pieces of the puzzle coming together. Traumatize the American public to the point where they are absolutely brain dead, and are in this reptilian survival mode, that they're in a fetus position, and their quivering, shaking hand, hands the pen to a bureaucrat or police or other operative to sign in their name that all guns are illegal. And then anybody who doesn't sign is going to be investigated with the red flag laws, and then is going to be labeled a domestic terrorist, and then they're going to have some sort of court action saying they can't have guns because of whatever reason. That's where we're going, I think. And the question is that going to end it that way, or are you going to have a civil war? Are you going to have uprising? Are you going to have people saying, no one in this county, no one in this town, no one in this state is going to rise up and do this? There's the other weird thing about Texas. Texas is one of the best armed states in the country, and I have it almost impossible to think that someone in Texas
didn't have a gun to shoot the guy.
Didn't have a gun. And it doesn't matter if Walmart says, well, we're a gun-free zone, which I don't believe in the first place, because if you have a concealed carry
somebody's
permit,
got a 22 in their ankle. Yeah.
Of course. I always carried a 22. I carried a couple of them. But I always carried a 22 revolver or a 22 Beretta in my pocket. Always. I didn't care where I was. You don't go into government buildings and stuff. But when you're in the civilian world and you have a permit, you are always carrying for that sort of an event, because you never know if something's going to happen. Some crazy guy's going to come in, and wherever you're at, you want to be able to protect yourself.
Excellent point.
In Texas,
Yeah,
is the best armed state in the country.
I agree with that completely. I go to Texas, almost every restaurant says no guns beyond this point or whatever, but they don't necessarily have any there's no magnetometer or anything. It's sort of the honor system. Scott, Kimberly is watching us on YouTube, and she's saying that this is Operation Northwoods. That's obviously a plan that we've heard about to stage false flag events. What can you say about that? Is that what we're seeing, an activation of Operation Northwoods?
Well, Northwoods was, I think, one of the first ones that was exposed, and I think Kennedy rejected it. Yeah, and it was about blaming deaths of Americans, a plane that I think was going to be taken down, and it was being planned and orchestrated by the American military generals at the time. So it was rejected. It was originally designed to overthrow Cuba. I think this is a type of psyop. This has evolved a lot since 1962 in the Cold War. That's when you're going after communism in Russia and Cuba and elsewhere. But this is far worse. This is a orchestrated attack upon the American people to traumatize, to psychologically crush, to put them into a fetus position politically and take away their rights, their guns, and create really a police state entity. And that is the greatest threat this country's ever faced. And I have not seen it so bad until what we're seeing now with this ushering in of the Domestic Terrorism Act, Trump going down and supporting red flag law theories. Instead, Trump should have gone down, and he should be saying the right to keep and bear arms guarantees people's security. Everybody in that Walmart should have had the right to be armed with a gun on their hip and in their pocket. If someone was armed, that person would never have come in and shot the place up. So I'm going to make it able for everybody who has a concealed carry permit to have that with them in every state. Reciprocity. The Second Amendment guarantees people the right to keep and bear arms. That's the side Trump needs to come on, because that's the side that enables people to defend themselves against lunatics. And it also will stop these sort of events from being so pervasive, because suddenly, if they're thinking they're going to get away with some operation in Walmart, and some ex-security guard or ex-military guy who isn't part of the operation, who happens to be in Walmart, thinks that someone's coming in shooting up the place, he's going to pull his gun and shoot back, and that could expose everything. So it's very healthy and necessary that the president get up and articulate that the Second Amendment must be preserved in order to defend people's lives against these rogue operations. If he's going to pretend that this is real, if he's going to be part of the narrative and say we need to stop this, don't get on the high horse about white supremacy. That's a decoy. That's luring into this civil war potentiality in police state. Get up and say every American, white, black, brown, every religion has the right to defend their lives, and the Second Amendment is something that every woman and every senior and every person in a wheelchair should have on them, so that they are not the victim of thugs or robbers or things like that. That's the American spirit. That's what Trump needs to get on and really express and articulate, not play defense. See, that's the problem now, Jason. They are throwing up these false flag attacks or these shootings, and they're justifying and explaining that guns cause it. No. The other thing about the Dayton, Ohio, this guy was supposedly leftist and connected to Bernie and all this other stuff. There's a lot of weirdness about this, that the president needs to come on the side of the Constitution and say everybody is going to be protected. Their Second Amendment rights are meant to protect them from events like this, because police can't be there everywhere, and we don't have the manpower or the desire to live in a police state. So the Second Amendment is the solution to this, and the NRA would be on board. Gun owners of America would be on board. Every American would be on board with this. And I think that's what he needs to do before 2020. If he plays the victim, if he plays reactive, if he thinks he's going to win Democrats because he votes against guns, he's dead in the water. He will lose the election, because people who value the Second Amendment, which is pretty significant, they're watching him very closely, and they're going to say, If you make one move to damage my ability to keep and bear arms, I'm walking away and I'm done with you, Trump, and you're gone. And those people don't care about who comes into the presidency because they've already written off the government. They've written off America. They've written off that this is a free country anymore. There's a significant, substantial amount of the population that believe that say, this country is so gone, I want no part of it. I'm just going to live in Texas or Idaho or Wyoming or wherever, or Oklahoma, and live out the last days on my farm or my ranch or my home, but I'm going to be armed to the teeth. And they're in defensive posture because they perceive these attacks against them. If Trump stands on the side of the attackers, his presidency is dead in the water. If he's on the side of the gun protecting and the Second Amendment and the police and the military, the good ones, standing up and championing that armed citizens create a very safe and polite society against lunatic punk kids that are out of their minds, then then he'll win. That's what needs to happen. But this is a very dangerous time, because if he is stupid enough to listen to his daughter or anybody else run in the room shouting, "Daddy, Daddy, we need to stop these poor kids from being killed," and he sides with the gun confiscating leftists and the Democrats and all that, he's done. I hope he doesn't do that, but he's very vulnerable in this. He makes knee-jerk reactions, and he did it in the Skripal poisoning when Haskell showed him pictures of dead ducks. He did it in the Syria firing 58 missiles when that didn't even happen. And those are dangerous things internationally. He can start a war and get everybody killed in America because of that knee-jerk reaction. So he's got to step back and have better advisors around him too. There should be a Second Amendment advisor that really takes this issue up and champions it.
Absolutely. And, people in the comments are telling us, Scott, that the Dayton, Ohio shooter was linked to Antifa. There's a lot of things that aren't really coming out in the mainstream. People are also asking about this mosque shooting analysis video that you and I did back in March, just shortly after the shooting occurred. People can get that on Patreon. It's called "Was the New Zealand Mosque Shooting a Staged False Flag?" with special guest Scott Bennett, and people can get that at patreon.com/shellgame, as well as patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. Scott, we've got just a few minutes more. What else can you tell us about this? What can people expect to see in the days and weeks as we approach the 2020 election?
Well, be prepared for the standard operating procedure of the idiot press and the mainstream media all flooding the airwaves with all sorts of propaganda to try and wear people's resistance down and guilt trip them and fatigue them into being susceptible to quiet, soft legislation that starts to insidiously slip in there saying, well, we just want an extra piece of paper on the gun background check. Well, we just want an extra security guard at the gun shows. Well, we just want this and that. Be prepared for that and to reject it entirely. And really go to your town hall meetings and go to everything that you can and champion that a well-armed society is a safe society, and the Second Amendment is the only way to stop these shootings. And the responsibility is with the parents and the families who create monsters. And our job is not to take care of monsters. Our job is to take care of ourselves and kill the monsters when they come to our door and try and break in and kill us. That's what the Second Amendment's for. So they need to put pressure on their members, prepare themselves, and also don't be buying in and make a schematic, make a list. Sometimes when you write these things down, it keeps them easier to track. So you write down Gilroy, you write down Dayton, Ohio, you write down El Paso, Texas. You write down also what are the other significant events that were going around politically that may have been distracted away from the Mueller probe to the Cummings thing to the investigation of Renee Alexander Acosta. I'll end it there, Jason. Now we've got the governor of Florida looking into Renee Alexander Acosta and his sweetheart deal for Epstein. And as part of that, he's going to be revealing all the other things that Renee Acosta has done. Remember, he was the U.S. federal attorney that prosecuted the Swiss bank terrorist financing case under Brad Birkenfeld. That was Renee Alexander Acosta. And he also did this Epstein sweetheart deal. Again, the common link is deep state money, international Swiss banks, European banks, and Acosta worked with Eric Holder, Lanny Brewer, and the Department of Justice, and Hillary Clinton, the State Department, and the Clinton Foundation, and Covington and Burling, and others on this deal regarding UBS, Brad Birkenfeld, terrorist financiers, Russian oligarchs, Igor Alenikov, Abdullah Aziz, all these people. That was Rene Alexander Acosta, the former Secretary of Labor, the former U.S. attorney, federal attorney. He was right there in the middle. So he is a big piece of this deep state coup against Trump. Trump's got a lot of bad people around him. The other thing is he's got people, that are waging these sanction wars and trying to pick fights with Iran and sanction Iran. There's a lot of trouble that he's got people in the Treasury Department involving in that. Rand Paul is trying to settle this down, but Trump he's got a lot of people and pressure around him that he needs to really have a new team, I think, come in. He needs to have Rand Paul, Senator Dick Black. He needs to have Tulsi Gabbard, I think, come into his administration. I don't think she's going to be the political candidate for the Democrats, which means Trump needs to hire her and bring her in some capacity as UN representative or something, because she's his greatest threat. Make no mistake, if all things being equal and Tulsi Gabbard walks onto the stage with Trump and he gets us into a fight or a conflict or a war and she says everything the opposite, she could win. Now he seems to be okay right now for 2020 based on his domestic achievements and based on his success with North Korea, but he needs to do a lot more in pulling us out and making sure Americans, and his original promise to end the Middle East wars and getting us out of Syria and elsewhere, that he honors that, or at least gives the impression that he's honoring that.
Yeah, I think people who watch us every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern know that you're not a big fan of Alex Acosta and you are a big fan of Tulsi Gabbard. We're sort of out of time, but it is worth mentioning her epic takedown of Kamala Harris at the Democratic debate. It was interesting to note, Scott, how Tulsi Gabbard, despite being a Democrat, is definitely receiving the mainstream news treatment that Donald Trump receives as well. So I don't know if I like Tulsi Gabbard in some regards. A lot of people tell me that she has some very questionable religious ties in her background with a cult in Hawaii. So we're going to reserve judgment on exactly, for me at least, exactly what I think of Tulsi Gabbard as a candidate. Just looking at how the media and the mainstream reacted to her, I have to disagree with the likelihood of her winning a presidential campaign in 2020 or even the nomination from the Democratic Party. She seems to be more in the position of a Bernie Sanders type, where she's going to organically potentially gain a lot of support from women, from more liberal people, from centrists who like some of the things the Democrats say but are anti-war and all that. So we'll have to see what happens with Tulsi Gabbard. Scott, I'll speak to you next Thursday. Thank you very much for joining me today. Definitely want to remind our viewers to pick up a copy of the book Shell Game. They can get that at Scott's website, shellgamewhistleblower.com. Make your way over there. You can donate to Scott, help support whistleblowers, and if you enjoy the show, it's very important that Scott has your financial support. You can also support Scott by going over to patreon.com/Shellgame. Become a monthly sponsor of Scott, and you can watch his regular broadcasts there. He's doing a series called Truth versus News. He's got a lot of frequent posts as well as the shows that he and I do together. I hope that people will also become sponsors of Crowdsource the Truth by going to patreon.com/Crowdsource the Truth or subscribestar.com/Crowdsource the Truth. And if you haven't seen this Christchurch mosque shooting analysis video that Scott and I did back in March, I hope you will check that out. I found it to be an incredibly informative video. I'm putting a link into the comments right now. Thanks everybody for watching. We've got a fantastic new show coming up at 4 o'clock today. Dr. Corsi's Prescription for America. Do not miss it. See everybody soon. Thanks for watching.